The age of men is over. The time of the
mega corporation
has come.
Amazon had all the money, all the time, and all the talent, but the Rings of Power still bombed harder than your grandma at a comedy open mic. In this video, I'm going to break down why the Rings of Power pissed so many people off, and spoilers, it's not because everyone's racist or sexist. Now, I'm not a true Tolkien geek. I cannot recite the history of Middle-earth from memory like some pop culture Rain Man, but like a lot of people, The Lord of the Rings is easily my favorite film series of all time. It opened the door to the vast occult realm of fantasy and science fiction from which I have never truly emerged. Plus, I'm really easy to please and I adore stupidity. When Dominic Toretto starts talking about family, I tear up a little. It's safe to say I was all the way in the bag for this one, like a fat guy at a chocolate factory. Which is why watching The Rings of Power had me like... At a cursory glance, this is strange. I mean, the show looks great, they clearly plagiarize the most iconic art design from The Lord of the Rings, the acting isn't cringeworthy, I'm not a purist that blows a fuse over changes to the lore, so what the fuck happened? Let's look at a few key factors. There's no better way to illustrate the difference between The Rings of Power and The Lord of the Rings than by comparing the musical score. Any Lord of the Rings fan can hum at least half a dozen tunes from the soundtrack. Take a second and try to hum something from The Rings of Power. And I think that makes my point for me. And it's not just how memorable the Lord of the Rings score is, it's the scope and feel of it. It bleeds epic. I literally get chills every time I hear the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Of course, many other aspects of the films lend themselves to conjuring the epic feel of Lord of the Rings, but I'd argue the music is what elevates the trilogy to legendary status. However, it would have been pointless if the films didn't allow the soundtrack to breathe and seep into your soul. Let's take a look at an epic establishing shot from The Lord of the Rings. Now just take a look at a supposedly epic establishing shot from The Rings of Power.
These most valiant of warriors.
It's almost like the Rings of Power people were embarrassed by their soundtrack, or just assume all our brains are scrambled by TikTok to the point where we can barely pay attention for more than a couple of seconds at a time. Which brings me neatly to the dialogue. I've heard people shitting on the dialogue in The Rings of Power, and I have to say, it's not that bad. There's just a difference between a master like Tolkien and mere mortals like the rest of us. Tolkien's dialogue may not be particularly realistic, but it carries deep meaning and it's absolutely gorgeous. It transports you and evokes rich characters. The dialogue in The Rings of Power, on the other hand, reminds me of AI-generated art. Pretty, but ultimately trivial. Peter Jackson wisely kept a lot of Tolkien's best writing in the script and somehow managed to elicit stellar performances from the entire cast. Seriously, even the generic evil henchmen are nailing it.
Why can't we have some meat?
That sidey orc is more memorable than half the Rings of Power cast. The end result is that there are literally hundreds of iconic lines from the movies that will make you cream your pants with pure hype.
You shall not pass!
Of course, it doesn't matter how good your dialogue is unless people care about the characters saying the lines. Lord of the Rings hardly has the most complex or nuanced characters, but they're incredibly likable and easy to root for. I gotta give credit to the Rings of Power here for trying to create more ambiguous, flawed characters, but Tolkien's work doesn't lend itself too well to this attempt. This isn't Game of Thrones. That was probably the most disappointing aspect of the show for me. Barely a couple of episodes in and I had already checked out of like 90% of the characters' storylines because I hated them all. I don't buy any of the relationships between the characters either. I mean, look at how Galadriel treats her so-called friends.
Commander! Wait, no!
We keep moving!
Why would anyone put up with her? She sounds like a psychotic fascist. It says a lot about your characters when I dislike your main protagonist more than I dislike the hideous monsters she's fighting. I suppose they're trying to make her a more morally ambiguous character, and I know writers in our postmodern era tend to sneer at simple good versus evil narratives, but there's a time and a place for nuance, and it's probably not when your villains look like this and your heroes look like this. Most people aren't aware that before he dipped his toes into the pools of fantasy, Peter Jackson was a horror guy. This, I think, is what made The Lord of the Rings work so brilliantly. As an 11-year-old, Peter Jackson made me shit my fucking pants. He took some of the campier stuff from the novels and transformed it into something larger than life and genuinely unsettling. The showrunners of The Rings of Power were smart enough to recognize Peter Jackson's genius and stuck with the horror themes. But the difference is that they just inserted cheap jump scares, where Jackson managed to invent a whole new flavor of horror, epic horror. I can't discuss the monumental failure of The Lord of the Rings without touching upon the $500 million elephant in the room. If you adjust for inflation, The Rings of Power Season 1 and The Lord of the Rings trilogy cost about the same, except Peter Jackson managed to get 12 hours of a legendary film out of it, if you count the extended versions, while The Rings of Power only gets about 8 hours of mediocre content. CGI has come a long way since The Lord of the Rings, and yet LOTR still looks way better and has become way more iconic than The Rings of Power ever could. I can only assume that Peter Jackson must have used slave labor to pull this off, because it makes no sense that 20 years later we still can't beat his work. Guess it just goes to show you, money can't buy you love, money can't buy you passion, and money most certainly can't buy you an imagination. The creepiest aspect of The Rings of Power is how transparently corporate the thinking behind it is. They noticed the clout other franchises like Star Wars were getting out of virtue signaling and doubled way down on the diversity. They also obviously noticed that Game of Thrones was a smash hit and decided they wanted to be in on that action too. Suddenly, there's way more political intrigue, backstabbing, and moral complexity. Amazon already made this mistake with the Wheel of Time show, and apparently they thought that worked a treat. None of this was the thinking of artists. It was the machinations of marketing executives trying to hit every demographic, exploit the cynical wave sweeping our media, and draw every eyeball to their project, and fuck if it fits the actual story they're telling. To understand all of this, I think we need to distinguish between adaptations and fan fiction. Adaptations are where an artist builds upon the original source material and brings their own artistic spin to the table. Fan fiction, on the other hand, is a looser term. For example, 50 Shades of Grey was originally Twilight fanfiction, despite the fact that they barely share any similarities other than the mannequin-esque protagonist and the borderline abusive male love interest. The entire reason the author wrote 50 Shades of Grey was to exploit a market trend and get rich by riding Twilight's bandwagon. The Shining, on the other hand, is one of the greatest adaptations ever made, despite the fact that Stephen King famously hated the liberties Kubrick took with his novel. It's not about sticking to the source material, it's about creating a work of art that stands on its own. More importantly, it's about the intention behind the work. Today, it's abundantly clear that we are fast moving away from artistic adaptation and on a downward spiral to lazy fan fiction, meant to exploit existing fan bases or appeal to the lowest common denominator. Star Wars, Marvel, Jurassic World have all journeyed down this dark road, to the point where they are basically unrecognizable, soulless cash grabs. The Rings of Power is just the latest casualty of this corporate blitzkrieg. I know comparison is the thief of joy, and this isn't an ideal attitude for appreciating art, but I think it needs to be said. I know there's people out there that have cried in the MCU movies or been deeply moved by the Star Wars sequels, but I do not count myself in their number. Most blockbuster franchises have left little or no impression on me, and I treat them as mindless entertainment. Lord of the Rings is different for me. I genuinely love it. It enthralls me, brings me to tears, makes me feel like life is worth living. So watching its slow decline, first with the Hobbit movies and now with the Rings of Power, I think I'm finally starting to understand how fans feel when something they adore is desecrated, especially when it's clearly done for profit. And in a world fraught with moral complexity, political tensions, and ideological balkanization, can't we at least let Tolkien adaptations be optimistic? Or at least let Tolkien's heroes remain inspiring and admirable? Can't we all, for once, just get along? Apparently not, judging by the state of mainstream entertainment today. Our options seem to be big, loud, mindless crap or soul-sucking, nihilistic nightmares. And since corporations are hardly stupid, I have to assume that's where the money is now. Just kinda makes me feel sad and lonely. So what does all this mean? Are we doomed to witness the excruciating collapse of filmmaking as the putrid fingers of the mega corporations remake the world in their own soulless image of bland, market-tested products devoid of all meaning and feeling? Is this the hour of wolves and shattered shields where we break all bonds of fellowship? I think not. I'd like to leave you with a quote from a wise old man that gives me comfort in times like these.
Death is just another path, one that we all must take. The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass.
Oh my god, it's so fucking beautiful. Please, if you haven't seen them, watch the Lord of the Rings movies or read the books. They will blow your fucking mind hole.